Hi guys, my name is Shea Stackhouse. I'm a knife maker and I live in New Zealand. Welcome to the channel. If you've been here before, thank you for tuning in. However, if you're new, sit back and enjoy. In today's video, I'm going to be making some Damascus steel from recycled steels. The steels I'll be using is some very old shipping chain. The stuff is pretty heavy and possibly from the mid 1800s, which is quite cool. The shipping chain will need to be cut down into more manageable sections to forge out into bars. The bars will hopefully be a uniform section and they'll be approximately 8 to 10 millimeters thick, or about 5/16 of an inch. The other recycled steel I'll be using for this video is some very wide sawmill steel. Now, I've used this stuff before in other projects and I know it contains some nickel. My plan is to have that nickel create a monochromatic pattern in the surface of the blade, and I think it'll look quite cool. Preparing the bandsaw steel, on the other hand, is much easier to cut down. It's quite thin steel, as I mentioned. I'll use a plasma cutter rail that I've sort of made myself. It's a very janky, jerry-rigged setup, but it works really well for what I want it to do. And the strips are going to be cut down into about 30mm pieces. And this is done pretty quickly. This is a really good opportunity to introduce some of the tools that I'll be using for the video. The power hammer is going to get used a lot in this video. This is a 40kg Anyang power hammer, and I've had this since 2019, maybe 2020, and it's a fantastic tool. What's great about the power hammer is it hits stuff really fast and it can crunch the steel down into more manageable dimensions. It's really good at straightening out the chain as well, demonstrated in this video. Another really invaluable tool that I use for making Damascus quite frequently is the hydraulic press. Now, the press is quite different to the power hammer. It's more of a squishing tool rather than a hammering, hitting tool, to put it bluntly. The hydraulic press is really good at crunching down the steel to the dimension that I want, and it's a little slower and a little bit more user-friendly. So we use this a lot more in classes, so if people are not too familiar with the power hammer, or it's a bit scary, hydraulic press is definitely the way to go. Once the chain has all been forged out and cooled down, I'm going to be taking an angle grinder to clean off the surface of the chain material. It's quite scaly and there's a lot of oxide on the surface, so I want to reduce that by getting rid of a lot of that material. Once it's all cleaned up, the steel needs to be cut down into the correct lengths, so I'll be doing this for the bandsaw steel and the chain steel. My plan is to assemble essentially a steel sandwich with the construction. This is going to be an alternating set of layers where I've got chain meeting a piece of bandsaw steel, and then another piece of chain meets another bandsaw steel, and that'll approximately give me around maybe 18 layers, which will be quite good. I then clamp the bars together and use an arc welder to tack weld them together while they heat up in the forge. The tack welds will get ground off or cut away later. They're not really necessary for the forging, but I just need everything to hold itself together when I do the initial squish on the hydraulic press. This is the exciting, sort of satisfying part about the filming and making of the Damascus. I'm using the hydraulic press to compress those layers and draw the bar down into a nice narrow section. Once the bar is all forged out to dimension, I draw it out to a longer section, and it will probably go under the power hammer after this to get a more uniform profile. This is also the point where the video gets fairly repetitive, where I'm essentially making a bar similar to what I've just done. Once it's forged out, the bar needs to cool down, and I restart that process of cutting, cleaning, welding, and restacking that steel. The plan is to go for around 500 layers for this piece of bar, and it's going to take a few stacks to get there. After I've done the cut and restack, I'm going back straight into the forge and then going onto the hydraulic press to squash that back out. I've done a slightly taller, higher stack for this bar. This will just give me a few more layers. Each piece that I've cut already represents about 18 layers, so if you multiply those, it'll be pretty easy to work out how many layers I'm working on. And again, squashing the bar, compressing the steel, and fusing the material together. It's a really fun process. You do get lost in the repetitiveness of it. It sometimes might be good to write down how many layers you've made and how many times you've redone the stack. I find I forget sometimes if I'm not keeping track of my numbers. As I'm working, I'm going to be alternating between using the hydraulic press and the power hammer. At the moment, using the aggressive drawing dies is a really great way to speed up the process. The bar itself will move faster using the rounded dies opposed to the flat dies. And once I get closer to a final dimension, I use the power hammer to really smoothen out the surface. The power hammer is really good at breaking off the large chunks of scale and oxide, just meaning that I have less work to do in the grinding stages. On this last restack, the bars are a much more chunky block section, and I'm only doing a stack of 4 or 5. The power hammer and press are really invaluable for this process. They really allow me to work efficiently and fast. If you were doing this by hand, you're going to expect it to cost a lot more gas, time and energy. You might need someone else to help you with this, and you're probably going to be using a sledgehammer, knowing your luck. Now that the steel is forged down into its final dimensions, these dimensions are fairly chunky. I don't really know what I'm doing with this project quite yet, so it's nice to have a big old bar of steel waiting for a project to manifest. Once the bar's cooled down, I am going to clean off and cut off a section at the end of the bar. I want to polish it with a 120 grit belt and then following a 400 grit belt. Polishing the cross section will essentially make the etching a little bit more clean, and it's easier to tell what the pattern's doing when you've got more polished steel. So I'm going to be cleaning the steel off and then throwing that into some ferric chloride for a little while. So the plan is to turn the forge back on and begin cutting off a section of the steel. I only want a little bit. I don't want to overcomplicate things by cutting off too much. I just want a 10 by 10 millimeter bar to forge out and essentially see what's happening. I've chosen to forge all of these bits of steel by hand. They're pretty small and pretty easy to move under a 1.3 kilo hammer. And that shows off a little bit of hammer control, which is always pretty fun. Under the hammer, at such a small section, the steel moves pretty easily and is very soft to work compared to other steels. So the steel might not be very hardenable or tool steel related, just judging by the softness of the forging. But we don't know yet, we'll see. After forging to final dimension, I swap to a ball peen hammer, which is cratering the surface of the steel. This is pushing all of the high spots into the middle of the bar and creating a almost topographical map, if you can imagine that. I'm going to be grinding off all of these high spots so that the steel pattern can be revealed. This is a pretty easy pattern to produce. I do it a lot in my chef's knife making, and it's a fairly random pattern, which is quite exciting. Grinding off the majority of the indents from the forging of the ball peen hammer, and then once I've got everything nice and smooth to approximately a 400 grit finish, I'm then going to be putting that back into some ferric chloride to reveal the pattern. I'm pretty happy with how that worked with just a little sample piece. It'll be really exciting to see what actually happens with the bar once I decide what I want to make. The bandsaw steel's done what I expected it to, achieved more of a white contrast, and the chain steel is a kind of black and grey contrast, which is really fantastic. The steels are maybe not overly hardenable, I'm not too sure. It might be good to see what that looks like once I play around with heat treat. But what is satisfying about the project is giving new life to old steel and old tools. This material would have probably been put in the rubbish or thrown away, discarded, but it's nice to add new life to these materials. And I really hope you've enjoyed the video. Stay tuned for some of the upcoming projects I've got planned for the bar in the future. Otherwise, thank you very much, and we'll see you another time. Thank you.